Hello, hello. Today I wanted to talk with you a bit about grief and loss, and I had to take a deep breath there for a second because sometimes that topic is not the easiest one to dig into. And I was thinking about this topic at Christmas time, the week of Christmas, and the time got away from me, or maybe I just wasn't ready to do it. But um, for me, grief and loss very much hits close to home. If you don't know me, I have a daughter who passed away. And since that's happened, a lot of people in my life and in my community here on social media have reached out to me in different ways. Oftentimes, there are other people who have lost someone significant or a child, and so that comes up for me pretty regularly, I would say. And so I'm just giving folks a few minutes to hop on, but that is the topic for today. This is streaming in four different places, four or five different places, actually. So I would love to say hello if you listening in. If you watch the replay, also please say hello, and I check all the comments afterwards. And I may not see your comment depending on where you're listening from, but thank you for listening. And yeah, let's dive in now as people are joining. So grief and loss. In my experience, and I'm going to give you some personal perspective, and I'm going to give you some insight or tools maybe, or perspective from a professional point of view, because this is a topic that I work on with people. But so I'm going to share all of that if I can in the next half hour. But personally, for me, grief and loss showed up very early in my life. My mother passed away when I was 4 years old. So my mother had multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune condition. That's part of the genetic predisposition that I have, is from her MS. And after I was born, she never really recovered from giving birth and passed away when I was 4. So my whole life with her, she was a very sick person and in bed. So there was sort of that, there was very much that type of relationship that is not what a child needs when they're first born and a young child, right? Like a really restricted, limited, and in many ways sad relationship. And then she died. And when my mother died, in our house growing up, I don't know about anybody listening, what your experience has been in your own families, but in our house, nobody ever spoke of her. We didn't really go to the cemetery. My father remarried, and whether it was out of respect for my stepmom's feelings or for my dad's own discomfort at talking about it, whatever was the reason, we did not talk about my mother. So it was very much like taboo. I don't know if taboo is the right word. I think if I maybe would have asked, I would have gotten some questions answered, but I just knew not to ask, right? So that was my early childhood experience around loss and really losing someone so important. That's a primal relationship, parent and child. Then if you've known me at all for the last few years, you know that I have a daughter who passed away. So I have the distinct and unique experience of having been a young girl without her mother, and now being a mother who's lost her daughter. And so that loss, many people will say, a parent shouldn't lose their child. A parent should never bury their child. That is a loss that's also very unique and different than a lot of other ways. And my experience with that loss, that's what I want to share a little bit more too with you, is how did I navigate that? And how did I do that differently than the way I experienced the loss growing up? Because we did handle it very differently now, and I felt like it needed to be handled differently. So the first thing that I think is so important is the willingness to embrace and feel the emotions and the loss. A lot of times people are really just avoiding, just sort of pushing out of reach, sort of like, no, I don't want to go there. No, this is too painful. When we see someone who's in pain and who's in grief and loss, we try to make it better for them, or we don't want to bring it up because we don't want to make them sad again. And I think what is so helpful, it's not just that I think this, there's a lot of experts. I've done a ton of reading, I've taken some training on it, and actually allowing yourself to embrace the experience and embrace the emotions is so important to be able to move through them. And that, I think, is what a lot of people are dealing with, is they haven't moved through their experience. They haven't moved through the emotions. And so they get stuck. They get stuck in grief. I've had in my group, which is one of the places that this is streaming, there's 2 or 3 people who have also lost a child who have sent me private messages. How do you do it? How do you deal with it? And I'm going to be honest with you, every one of them, their loss happened many, many, many years ago. I have one woman I was on the phone with, and we're going through the conversation, and was so struggling with sadness. And she's, I lost my daughter as well. And I said, when did you lose your daughter? And she said, 23 years ago. 23 years ago. And she was still in that place of stuckness and sadness. So that's really what I'm pointing to when I say, if you can be with the pain of it as it arises, as you go through it. And it's different at different points. And I know it's different for people in different ways. But the commonality of being willing to feel the loss. And, it's not only around death, although that's primarily what I'm talking about in this conversation, but it's not only around death. It's also around, oh, sorry, I just saw a comment. Hello, might have to leave early. Okay, it says Facebook user, so I'm not sure who you are, but thank you for coming on. But it's not only around death, it's also around any other significant loss. When you have something that you thought was going to be, like divorce, that's the loss of a marriage. That's the loss of a dream and how you thought it was going to be. When Charlotte, my daughter, was born, it was immediately clear she was had big medical challenges, and she was rushed. I live in New Jersey. She was rushed to New York for an open heart surgery. I was still in the hospital from having delivered her and didn't even get there for 2 days because I had a C-section. So that was a loss of, going to the hospital and expecting to bring home a normal, healthy baby. And that dream was pretty quickly diminished or demolished. And at that time, I had a friend who was also a therapist. And she said, maybe you want to get a prescription for something. Maybe you need an antidepressant, or you need something to help you sleep. And my response was, no, I want to feel everything that a mother should feel when her newborn baby is fighting for her life. I don't want my baby fighting for her life and I'm numbed out. I don't want to be in that experience that way. I want to walk with her every step of the way. And I still felt that way 15 years later when she died. And the week that she was dying, we knew it was coming. We knew that week was different than all of the other hospitalizations. It just felt different. There was an intuition. I don't know how to explain it. And the same thing, I want to walk with her every step right up until her last breath. And we all were with her, my family, her dad, her brother, and I were with her in the hospital room as she died. And yes, there's like a period to go through. There's a period of adjustment. There's a period of like, whoa, my identity has just shifted. I'm no longer a mom of 2 children who are around and about in the world. I'm now a mom of 2 children, and one of them is gone. That's how I always say it. I always say I have 2 children. One of them has passed. And that sometimes throws people. People are like, they would say I have 1 child and not bring up the other one or something like that. So it's the willingness to embrace the feelings as they come up. And that the first year, that first everything that happens, the first Christmas or holiday, the first birthday, the first anniversary, those all hit people in a different way. And, they are what they are. There's not much to do to change that. It's to experience it and live it. And again, every time something like that comes up, my thought is, if I'm feeling right now sadness, if I want to cry, and there's times a song just might come on the radio and boom, I was feeling totally fine. And the next thing I know, I'm crying. And that's okay, because that reminds me of the connection and the love that we have. I'm not even going to say had, but that we have, because I still have it with her. And that's part of my perspective that I want to share with you, is that, it's just really another way to see it. So let me just recap before I move on to the next thing. Be willing to embrace the emotion, no matter how painful it is. We have a tendency to really avoid any emotion that feels bigger than us, and that feels bigger than us in a negative way. So that includes anger, it includes grief, it includes sadness, all of those emotions, but be willing to feel them. That's the only way you move through them. The more time you spend avoiding them, the more they stay there, and the harder it becomes to actually deal with them. So you want to just know that it's an emotion and it's going to move through. So that was the first thing, as a quick little recap. But then another way to see it, or the way that we have shifted in my family, which is different from my childhood when my mom died, the way that we shift it now in our perspective is, we create a connection now in the present moment. We include Charlotte in the present moment. We don't relate to her as a place of absence and loss. It used to be when Charlotte was alive, or I remember, we have memories and we talk about them, but I don't relate to her from a place of absence and loss, because that's a place from the past that has me stuck in the past. The way that we relate to her now, and the way that I relate to her very personally in my own mind, the way when I think of her, is as a present energy and a present connection. In my mind, Charlotte's physical body is gone, but not who she was, not her energy, not her presence. So how does that look? Okay. So in our household, we do a couple of things. Number one, we celebrate her birthday. I don't really celebrate or think much about the day that she passed. I certainly know the date, and there are people who send me messages on that date. And that's fine. I appreciate that they're thinking of me and of us. But to be honest, I don't put my energy or my attention to the day that she passed. I put it to the day of her birthday, when she became a part of my life. Because from that day forward to this very present day, she is a part of my life. So we celebrate her birthday. In fact, we still sing happy birthday to Charlotte. And maybe part of that is a belief. What's your belief around what happens after death? So my belief is the energy is still, excuse me, very much present and available for me to connect with. If you don't have that belief, that may seem weird to you, but we sing happy birthday. We also, this was my son's idea that we decided a couple years ago, and it has worked out beautifully. So I'm just going to share it with you. Dia de los Muertos, which means Day of the Dead, it's actually a couple of days, 2 or 3 days after Halloween. It's, I think, specifically a Mexican holiday, but they celebrate all of the souls who have passed. And so what we do is we make it a really fun, festive day. We drink sangria, we make Mexican food, we pull out pictures, not only of Charlotte, but of everyone who passed. Now I'm pulling out pictures of my mother, and my sister, who's older than me, has more memories of her, but we celebrate that way. And we celebrate, so this year for Christmas, Charlotte's dad, and if you saw my live on Monday, you know that we are no longer together, and some of the journey that has been. But he came over for Christmas with a gift for my son and for me from Charlotte. And he said, I just really sat and got quiet and thought about what would Charlotte want to give you this year. And so I went and got that. So we make her and her energy very much a presence in our day, still. Um, I talk to her pretty regularly, and all of that is very calming for me. So creating a connection from the present moment, which is very different than living in the past. And if you're feeling absence and loss, then you're living in the past. Okay. So if you have any questions about that, please put them in the chat. And if I can answer that better than I have right now in the conversation, I'm happy to do that with you. And again, this is my perspective. This is what has worked for us. I do know that, embracing the emotions is not just my perspective. Pretty much any expert in the field of mental and emotional health will tell you that that's what you want to do. But this way of connecting in the presence is maybe more personal to me and to my family. But if you've done anything like that, I would be curious to know. Two other things then I want to just briefly touch on. One is part of why we feel so lost, so helpless, so maybe fearful, whatever your feelings might be, is because of whatever beliefs you have around yourself and around your life going forward. So if you have a belief, let's just say it's the loss of a spouse, which would apply to divorce as well as death, right? If you have a belief, I can't do it alone. I'm not okay alone. Then when that loss happens, that belief is going to really kick in, and that's going to really color or influence your day-to-day experience of yourself, right? So what are your beliefs for yourself? There's your beliefs around what happens when somebody dies, but then there's also your beliefs around yourself. At the beginning, when Charlotte first died, I had to really look at my belief around myself and my identity. Was very much living the identity of being the mom of a special needs child. It completely dominated my life. It's what I did all the time. She was in the hospital all the time. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't have to live my life around the hospital. And any parent who's like become an empty nester, you have the same experience, right? Like, oh, this is different. But that brings me to, have you created your identity to be around the loss? So if you, and this is why I don't ever join the type of self-help groups or the support groups, it's really support groups, because the support groups keep you identifying with the problem. So if you join a group, and this is just me, again, do what works for you. I'm just sharing my perspective. But joining a group for parents who've lost their children, then it becomes, for me, my identity. That's who I am in the world. It's like a label. And I don't want that to be my identity or my label. My identity is Linda. And my identity is all the things that make me who I am. Having a child who died is one experience that is part of my life journey. But I'm very careful to not create and take on those types of identities, because I did in the past. I did, and it completely shifted how I related to myself. So another identity might be growing up in an alcoholic household, right? An adult child of an alcoholic. If you take on that identity, then you see yourself in your life in a particular way. Or a child who lost a parent. Those were two big identities for me when I was growing up. I don't have a mom, and my dad's an alcoholic. Really, really big. And it wasn't until I was able to shift that label and release that identity that I have the freedom to just be Linda. Like, what does that look like? What would that be? Who would Linda be if she hadn't had the limitations of that label? So it doesn't take away the memory and the experience. It's still part of my life. That is still brought me the lessons that I got. It still has me had the experiences that I had. Those don't go away. They just don't define me anymore. And I think the same thing is really important when you lose someone you love now, whether it's your child or your spouse. And part of it is we don't want to do them a disservice, or we think we are diminishing the love if we release that identity. I don't know if that resonates with you or not. A couple of years ago, I had a client who called me when we had not been working together, and she called me. I think someone referred her to me because she was a mom. She had twin boys, and one of them was very medically fragile. The other boy was fine. And not even, I shouldn't say medically fragile. He had significant issues, but he wasn't, going to die young. It wasn't about life or death. It just was not how she saw her children would be. And so she called me, and when we started to talk, she really saw that if she felt like if she let it be okay that this is how he was, then she was not being an advocate anymore, that then she wasn't, then she was diminishing his effort in his life. And so what I want to tell you is, if you let it be okay, however it is, whether you have someone who is in the end stages of life. I have a client right now whose husband has Alzheimer's, right? Being okay as you go through those end stages, being okay with a child who's not the way you expected they were going to be, and being okay with the death of someone. Being okay with it doesn't mean you love them any less. It doesn't diminish the effort of their life. It doesn't diminish the stand that you are, that they have their best life, or that they be remembered. It's not like you stop remembering them because you're okay with the fact that they died. I certainly at times am filled with grief, were enough to cry pretty hard when I miss my girl. But I cry and then I let it pass through. And I am okay that I am the mother of a child who passed, because that's what life is. If I decide I'm not okay, then I'm stuck. I'm stuck forever. I'm stuck in the grief. I'm stuck in the identity. It's going to shift how I show up for my son, how I show up in new relationships in my life. It's going to shift who I am for myself. And Charlotte wouldn't want that for me. And neither would the people in your life, right? So being willing to be okay and being willing to release the identity is critical for you to move forward. Now, listen, I get it. Maybe you don't want to move forward. Maybe you're at a place right now where I'm going to stay here. And that's fine. Being okay with where you are, right? That's fine. But when you're ready, when you're like, I really am not meant to live in this place anymore, these are the things that you're going to want to do. And if you didn't let yourself feel the feelings before, maybe it was 20 years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago. If you didn't let yourself then, it's time. It's time to let yourself so that you can actually move through that place. Okay, so again, just a quick recap: embracing the emotions, allowing yourself to feel them, being okay with what has happened. Oh, you know what? And I didn't say, choosing to be joyful would be the last piece of that. When you're letting go of the identity, which can be a little scary, if it's been who you've lived your life to be, okay, now I'm going to let that go. But you can choose to step into, I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to step into joy. We can be joyful even when bad things happen. We can be in joy and creating a life of love even when the love of our life has died, because the love comes from within you and is still there, whether somebody's physical body is or isn't still there. So relating to someone, creating connections in the present moment, not from the past, letting yourself feel the emotions, releasing the identity, being okay with what's so, and then making a conscious choice. So that's a lot. That's a lot in the 25 minutes that we've been chatting. And if you have questions, please send them to me. You know, part of my journey and my journey started when my mother died. When when I was born into an alcoholic household whose parent died, that started me on a journey. And it started me hurting and healing and looking and growing and searching and getting sick and getting sicker and then getting better, but then getting sick again and then crying. Like it's been my journey. But it's probably been your journey too, right? You may have different circumstances, but it's called life, right? But in my journey, as I walked that walk, I became a whole life coach. So I've done a lot of work. I'm a functional health practitioner. You can see right there my credentials, FDN practitioner. But I'm also a whole life coach, which is a very spiritual perspective. And I'm trained to help people heal this, at a cellular memory, help people heal spiritually from the experiences of their life. So I'm leading a course next week. It starts in healing codes, and that is a very spiritual perspective. I shared some healing codes throughout the month of December, just some basic universal ones. If you feel like that would benefit you, it's going to go on for 12 weeks. It's once a week for 12 weeks. We will meet and really dig into several different categories in life and where healing needs to happen in order for us to step into who we really want to be and how to really live a life from love. So if you're interested in healing codes, I'll send you information about that. But I hope that some of this perspective becomes a part of your journey. And I'd love to hear about it if you take any of that on. Okay? All right. So I will see you next time. I'm not sure what we'll talk about, but it'll be something. And I hope this brought a valuable perspective for you. And I'm wishing you a great new year. Okay, bye-bye.